Welcome back to Orthodox Family Life. Today we have Matushka Constantina Palmer back with us. So Christ is risen, Matushka.
Truly, he is risen.
It's a joy to see you again. I've missed our chats.
It's really nice to be back together.
And so what are we talking about today?
We're talking about the Myrrhbearers and maybe more broadly, the call of women to preach the gospel.
Right. I love this topic. And I think probably with the feast, we had both the Paschal celebration, then we had our feast day. So I am very unprepared for this. But as we were just chatting, we're never at a loss for words. So I think we'll have a good time regardless of we're a little bit laid back today. So
Yeah,
so you want to start with maybe who are the Myrrhbearers?
sure. So the Myrrhbearers, as recorded in all of the Gospels, consists of a group of women. Sometimes they're counted, I think, as like 7, sometimes up to 12. There's some really interesting commentaries actually, because sometimes we can read the scriptures and we can think that the gospel accounts contradict each other.
Mm-hmm.
But just as we do on Holy Thursday during Holy Week, when the fathers have arranged the gospel readings to go in a certain sequence for us to sort of see the whole perspective put into one timeline, there's lots of commentaries that do this as well with the resurrection narrative. So one of those great sources are these books here, the Great Synaxarion. They do a really good job of laying out the gospel passages and how at certain points it's just Mary Magdalene. At certain points it's all of them together, and they draw on all sorts of patristic sources like St. Gregory Palamas and many other fathers say that the Virgin Mary, the Most Holy Theotokos, is the first person that Christ appears to. So that gets, a lot of times that doesn't get pointed out in the Gospels because the evangelists were purposefully protecting her, knowing that no one would believe the account of the mother, of the bereaved mother, and also to protect her at that time from the anger of the Jews.
Yeah.
So
if I could jump in, that was actually something new to me. I didn't realize until this year that she was one of the Myrrhbearers. But when you think about the Lord's love for her and their relationship, like how could she not be not only one of the Myrrhbearers, but the first one that he appears to?
yes. So she is always referred to as Mary, the mother of like James, or Mary, the mother of James, and I don't know how it gets pronounced, Joseph,
yeah, I don't know.
but it's because they're referring to her. That when you see that in the scriptures, they are referring to the Theotokos, and they're referring to the children of her betrothed Joseph.
So these are Joseph's children from his first
Joseph's
marriage.
children. So they call her the mother of, like as the stepmother of, let's say. But when you see that, that's who they're talking about. That's the Mary that they're referring to. Then you have like St. Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus. You have St. Joanna, who was, she was like a servant in the house of Herod. She was married, I think, to, I can't think of his name, but he also, I think, worked for Herod. Then you have St. Susanna. They mentioned Susanna. And I'm just thinking off the top, Joanna, Susanna, Mary, Martha, Salome, St. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of our Lord and Savior, and then others. So with these women, this group of women that followed Christ, just like the multitudes of disciples, followed Christ, but they would have been at many of the significant events with Christ and the apostles. These women were, they, out of their own means, they provided for Christ and the apostles. St. Mary Magdalene, for example, who is really incredible saint, and there's a lot of information about her. She was raised obviously near to the Sea of Galilee in a place called Magdala. That's where she gets this Magdalene, and in actually in the life of the Theotokos, there's I'm trying to think now, I think Apostles Convent published it. They even mentioned that the evil one thought it was possible that she might have been the virgin, that she might be the lady. I guess the demons didn't really know that it would be a virgin, but they didn't fully understand that. But they thought they were suspicious of her. So from childhood, she was raised piously by her parents. She was educated which wasn't very common at the time, but her father wanted her to be educated, his only child. And in the scriptures, it says that she was the person from whom Christ cast out 7 demons. And different patristic commentaries will say she wasn't actually possessed, which is a common, especially in the West, a common perception is that she was possessed.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, she was tormented by, she was tempted by these demons. And 7 often just is a representative of many. It's not necessarily literally 7, but many demons had, would torment her, would tempt her, that kind of thing. So from her, Christ cast these demons away. And with her means, because she was one of the more wealthy ones, she did a lot to minister to the Lord and to his disciples, the apostles. And then after the resurrection becomes a huge influence in the world, particularly in the West, in France and in Rome. She influences people she teaches them she proclaims the gospel of Christ, and people come to believe because of her teachings and the miracles that she would work.
So she, like St. Constantine that we talked about a few weeks ago, is one of the most maligned saints in the church, I think. Probably her, St. Constantine, and maybe St. Paul, I would say.
Yeah.
Or St. John Chrysostom. But her and St. Constantine at the top. The other thing people often erroneously say about her is that she was a harlot.
That's correct. So that's not her. In the scriptures, there's references to 3 women who anoint Christ's feet. Mm-hmm. Mary Magdalene is not one of those women. Saint Mary, the sister of Lazarus, is one of those women. Then there is another Mary who we don't know the context of, I believe. And then there's an unknown woman, a sinful woman, who was a harlot, who St. Cassiani speaks about. Mm-hmm. But and I've never read anywhere in the patristic sources that St. Mary Magdalene was one of the women who anointed Christ's feet. So that's another misconception. It gets attributed to her, but it's not. It's actually St. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, sinful woman, and I believe a second Mary, like a second woman named Mary. So she's very misunderstood. There's all sorts of foolishness that comes with stories with St. Mary Magdalene. That's fine. People can say what they like. It doesn't make it true. And
if poor St. Mary, she doesn't deserve it though.
Yeah, no, but she also would have, who needs to prove themselves? When you dwell with Christ, when you're an equal to the apostles, people can believe whatever they like. People believe whatever they like about Christ, but that just makes people fools. It doesn't make any of it detract from her incredible holiness and what she has to offer to the church. So yeah, if people want to know, if people are confused by Jesus Christ Superstar musical, you can open up books and you can read true facts and not, someone's passionate desire to depict relations in a certain way that is only really inspired by the evil one. It's not.
Yeah, that was particularly egregious.
Yeah, and I mean, among other things that exist in media in the West, but it doesn't detract from her, just as the demons tormented her before Christ cast them away from her. That's fine. They can attempt to malign her name. It doesn't detract from her. So all these women, these incredible, brave women, were the only disciples of Christ, aside from St. John the Theologian, to not forsake Christ during his sufferings. So they were with him, when he went before Pilate. They were with him when he gets sent over to Herod. They are with him when he's condemned to whipping or, punished by whipping. They're with him when he carries his cross, and they're with him during the crucifixion and during his death and during the burial. The fathers talk about this, that they saw Christ laid in the tomb. They were there when Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who was, I believe, a Sadducee, when they requested Christ's body from Pilate, and Pilate allowed them to take Christ off the cross and to bury him in the tomb, the women were there and they witnessed that. So they saw the body in the tomb, and then they see that the tomb is empty.
Yeah, they show incredible bravery. and the hymns of the church even talk about this. When all
Oh,
the other disciples have run away, it
yeah,
is the women disciples of the Lord that stay and that are faithful out of their great love, probably not even thinking about their danger that they may be in. Um, Now I'd like to pause for a minute here because you did use the word disciple, and I know we chatted about this a little bit, but there's some confusion about maybe some of the terms that we can use:
right.
disciple, apostle, the 12. So, do you want to go over that, or would you like me to
Uh,
talk about it? Either way.
yeah, why don't you talk about it? I mean, I know that like there's 12 apostles, there's the 70
Hmm.
what are the 70 apostles, I guess. They also get called the apostles, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, the 70. But a disciple is a follower of Christ. It's
Right.
broader. It's broader than, the specific ordained, like the apostles became the bishops, for example.
Right. Right.
It's a broader term than that.
Yeah. So, what I've learned, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. I would love to hear anyone else who truly knows this from a patristic standard. But what I've learned is that the disciple, as you said, is a generic term for anyone that followed the Lord, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people actually followed the Lord and learned from Him. Right. So we know that. And then the word apostle is more about the people who were eyewitnesses of the Lord's life, miracles, and of His death. So they saw Him before and they saw Him after. So maybe we think about, like, we do call the gospel writer Luke the holy apostle Luke, but he's not one of the 12, right?
Yeah, he's not one of the 12, but because they were the 70 that were
Right.
kind of in the bigger circle. The inner circle was
Right.
the 12, the outer circle was the 70.
Right. But the apostles, what I've heard is extends beyond that. Anyone who saw the Lord before and after was an eyewitness, is what I've
I
heard.
mean, St. Paul is an apostle, but he had never met
Well,
Christ. I mean, yeah, he never met
well,
Christ.
well, he did after, right? He does have an encounter of the risen Lord.
Well, yes. I mean, if I would say many people
But
have
he's a
had
special case. I
encounters.
mean,
Yeah,
he's the only one I know of that wasn't, like, physically in the ministry before that.
yeah,
But again, if anyone out there knows, you can definitely clarify with us. But specifically the 12, referring to the 12 apostles, 11 after Judas hangs himself. But that is, as you said, the 12 are where we get our bishops from. And so this we really want to maybe distinguish between ordained,
right,
ministry, and what we're talking about, which is the spreading of the gospel, the teaching of the gospel
right.
throughout the world, right? So we're not saying that women should be ordained or anything like that. We're not going down that road. We are making a distinction.
We are making a distinction. So all are called to follow Christ. All are called to preach the gospel, but not all are called to ordained ministry. That is reserved for men.
Hmm.
So I guess maybe on that, because I actually speak a little bit about that specifically in my new book, Upon This Rock.
Which I'm enjoying. I've just started it, but I'm enjoying it greatly.
And I forgot to mention when we brought this up before, the cover, it's a photograph my sister took actually when she was visiting.
Oh,
This,
really?
yeah, and the back cover as well, the photo of Father John and I, it's a photo that my sister took. We, as a family, we went out to this hiking trail, and I didn't tell Father John because I didn't think he'd love the idea of a photo shoot. So I was wearing like, my like hiking clothes, and then I like pulled over my dress and my longer dress and my whatever. And he was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "We're just gonna get some photos real quick." So yeah, so my sister was the photographer for those. So and it's called Upon This Rock because the island of Newfoundland where we live, where Father John's the rector of the only parish in the province, is nicknamed the Rock, and you can see the houses are built literally like on the rock. There's not a whole lot of soil.
Yeah.
So this letter that I write, so the book the premise is that it's a collection of letters to this one parishioner that I named Theophila, just like St. Luke dedicates his Acts of the Apostles and his Gospel to Theophilus, which was a real person. But in addition to that, the fathers, St. John Chrysostom, St. Bede, they say that in as much as we're all God lovers, which is what the name means, they're also written for us. So she's sort of a composite character of different parishioners we've had throughout the years. And so this is, I went to the wrong place. Sorry. So this letter is called it's in the month of January, and it's called Effects of Acquiring Grace. January 2, St. Seraphim, so the feast of St. Seraphim Sarov and St. Juliana of Morum. Dear Theophila, today is the feast of St. Seraphim Sarov, a great saint who summarized for us the whole essence of ministry in the church, of the spiritual life in general, in one simple but poignant phrase: acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 souls around you will be saved. I believe it is easy for us to get lost when we focus too much on tactical approaches to sharing the gospel with others. We must always remember we are first called to live the gospel and then spread it, to become purified of the passions, then to assist others in being purified, to become holy, then to inspire others to become holy also. And this work, living the gospel, becoming holy, and in turn spreading the gospel and leading others to holiness, is not something relegated solely to priests or monastics. This is not merely the work of pious men, but of pious women. Today, we also celebrate the feast of St. Juliana. She was a married Russian woman, mother of 7, who lived a rather undistinguished life in the 16th century. Yet not only did she obtain the epithet saint, she acquired the Holy Spirit, the spirit of peace, through devotion and good deeds. St. Juliana combined piety and virtue. She was devout and practiced acts of charity, expressing her love through nursing the sick, sewing clothes for the impoverished, and distributing the last morsels of her food to the hungry. After the death of 2 of her children, she wanted to withdraw to a monastery, but her husband convinced her to remain in the world to raise her remaining 5 children. Despite the demands of running a household, raising her children, caring for her in-laws, and supporting her husband, St. Juliana intensified her ascetic works. She did not go easy on herself, but pushed herself to fast more strictly, sleep less, and pray more. Conversely, these days, if a person works a full-time job or has 1 or 2 children, we hear excuses for why we can't get to church on Sundays. We're too tired to fast, why the demands of our everyday lives make keeping the commandments impossible. And yet, examples like St. Juliana put us to shame. They remind us that the gospel was written for everyone, not just monks and nuns. She reminds us that with a little exertion, we can not only become holy, but inspire others to become holy. As we've said, the work of living and spreading the gospel is a work all Christians engage in, not merely the priest or the priest's wife, not merely the hierarchs, monastics, or martyrs. So then I explain a little bit about how every year Father John does a different series of homilies. 1 year he'll do the Gospels, 1 year he'll preach on the epistles, and then 1 year he does different themes. So one of these years, the theme years, he chose to do the teachings of Ierunsa Macrina of Volo. And so he used her book, Words of the Heart, her book that's a collection of her homilies that she delivered to her nuns, and he used that as like foundations for his homilies. So now we're going to get a little bit into that idea of like what's the role of men, of ordained ministry, and of women. In his introductory homily for the series on the Sunday of the Myrrhbearing Women, he said, though women cannot be ordained to the holy priesthood, keeping the order which Christ himself has established and given to us in his selection of the apostles, and though women are not permitted to preach specifically at our services, yet drawing from the example of the Myrrhbearers who brought the glad tidings of joy to the apostles, we indeed confess that women can become teachers and instructors in the spiritual life. Though she cannot baptize, the woman can indeed lead others to accept baptism. Though she cannot absolve, she can indeed teach others how to find and confess their sins. Though she cannot give Holy Communion, she can indeed teach about the importance of the mystery and show others how to prepare themselves properly for it. And I continue. In other words, the sacramental priesthood is one thing that is only transmitted to men by the laying on of hands of an Orthodox bishop. But the royal priesthood, the spiritual priesthood, the ability to draw people towards salvation, toward the sacramental priesthood, this feat belongs to all who have successfully struggled to acquire grace in union with God, whether they are ordained or not, whether they are men or women. Women, whether married or unmarried, mothers, widows, retired, employed, whether priest wives or not, all can lead others towards spiritual healing and union with God. This task is not easy, but it's possible. Becoming sanctified was not easy for St. Juliana. or Saint Seraphim for that matter. But not only was their holiness possible, their holiness became a reality. Each person will accomplish this in his or her own way. The gospel is for all, but each individual will exemplify the gospel in their own unique life circumstances, through motherhood, through monastic struggle, through a life of good deeds, acquiring a spirit of peace, becoming holy, living the gospel. With men, these things are impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And then I quote here Bishop Agostinos of Florina from Greece, amazing bishop that reposed in like 2009. Faithful women, a whole world lives in mental and physical pain, in despair and disappointment, and everywhere looks for hope of a better life. From you, it waits to hear the joyous news, the redeeming song, the words of eternal life, to see exquisite examples of a holy life. Through the prayers of our Holy Father among the saints Seraphim and Mother among the saints Juliana, may we have the courage and tenacity to fulfill the gospel, Christ's admonition to become perfect exactly as God intends for us. In this way, we will not only acquire a spirit of peace, but 1,000 around us will be saved. May the most holy Mother of God be with you. Matushka. So I really love that homily that Father John gave, because it really kicks it off for like, yeah, no, we're not called to be priests, and we're not called to be bishops, us women, and just as men aren't called to be angels, it's not their nature. Men, no matter how much they want to be an angel, they can't be an angel. And it's the same thing with us. But that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to preach Christ, that we're not supposed to declare the gospel, that we're not supposed to live a life worthy of his death and resurrection, and to share that with others. And that's what the Myrrhbearers did. And the really beautiful thing too about the Myrrhbearers being the first to witness the resurrection is that the many different fathers talk about how it was through woman that death entered the world. You know this, right? Eve, and then you have the second Eve. Theotokos is the second Eve. But it's the same idea of it was through women that the gate of paradise was closed, and it was women that first closed that gate, essentially. And now God has removed that curse from us, and he shows us it's woman who first hears that Christ is risen. The very first time the phrase Christ is risen is said is from the angel to the women, not to the father, not to the apostles, not to the bishops who were hiding for fear of the Jews. It's like you said, the women were so brave. Their love propelled them to go to Christ, to find him and to be with him. The only reason why they weren't there the entire time was because the law forbid it. They had to go and be in their homes for the Sabbath. It's the only reason why they weren't there from the moment he died, the whole way through. So St. Cyril of Alexandria says, for she of old was the minister of death, in other words, Eve was the minister of death, is now freed from her guilt by ministering under the voice of the holy angels, and by being the first both to learn and tell the adorable ministry. So woman is to both learn and tell the adorable ministry of the resurrection. The female sex, therefore, gain both acquittal from their reproach and the reversal of their curse. So it's in the scriptures that the angel says, go and tell the apostles.
Right.
So the Myrrhbearers became the apostles to the apostles, the preachers of the gospel to those who would go out and preach the gospel.
You said so many great things. We have to talk about several of them now, so I have to slow you down sometimes.
That's all right.
You got too excited. No, I just wanted you to keep going, but yeah, there's so much there. So one thing that really wanted me to want to talk to you about this was that everybody knows that we have a huge conversation in our culture right now between men and women. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Roles, like it's just utter chaos. Tons of bad ideas out there, right? But people are really struggling with these ideas and trying to find the way. And I think we sometimes make a mistake of, there's kind of basically two camps out there, right? And you can go to one camp or the other, and neither one feels 100% to me. But what I wish that at least Orthodox people would do is start with the saints. And if you read the lives of these women saints, you're going to see that it's not the answers the world is giving you, whether it's A or B. It's something totally different. And we see that that women aren't called to be in the priesthood, right? But that we still have a function it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when these discussions come up that people say things like, "Well, women can do things for the church too. They can clean the church." It's like,
They
well,
can. I
they
mean,
can. I've
you
done it,
absolutely can. You're more than welcome.
Yes, it's a noble and good thing to do, but when we have the conversation and we phrase it that way, it women can do many things. Women could be translating. Women could be doing
Oh, yeah,
iconography.
absolutely.
Women could
Women
be
are
singing.
called to do all of the same thing. That's the point, is
Yes.
in as much as a man is called, it might look different, yes.
Mhm.
Like, even in some cases, the women might not be at the lectern. Sometimes the woman is at the lectern because there's no other chanter around.
Mm.
Lots of times I've been the chanter. We don't have anyone else.
Right.
But so it might look different, maybe that role is filled by men in the parish. Men are the
Mm.
ones chanting, and men are obviously the ones serving in the altar and these things. There's so much though that we're called to. And so if we feel like, oh, I don't know what my role can be in the church as an Orthodox Christian, as a female, absolutely, the first thing, all you need to do is open up a book and read about the hundreds of thousands of saints that have existed. Find a life that resonates with you, that suits your circumstance, and say, okay, I'm gonna
Mhm.
try this then. Maybe I can't do all these other things, but maybe I can do extra prayers for people in the middle of the night. I can wake up in the middle of the night and do prayers in the night when most of the world is in the greatest of sins. The most sins happen in the nighttime.
Mhm.
So I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and this is what I will do to contribute to creating goodness in the world through prayer. There's so many things we can do.
Mhm.
We get stuck with only seeing these very specific roles: the priest in the
Yeah.
altar, the altar server,
Mhm.
the chanter at the chanter stand, or whatever it might be. Even like maybe professors, but I mean, there's lots of women that are professors as
Mhm.
well, and even teach at seminaries and different things. But maybe we get tripped up by those things. There's a host of things available to us as women. It's literally the same. It's
Yeah,
exactly the
except for the priesthood. It's
same.
pretty much everything else.
There's a few things that we're precluded from, but at the end of the day, like, where our mindset should be going, where our heart should be going is, but what does God want from me? It's not what
That's
I
right.
want to give to God. Okay. That's
Mhm.
what we always think of. We always think,
Mhm.
well, if it's not good enough for God, then if I'm not good enough and the way I pray and the way I live my life isn't good enough, well, then I'll just go to hell. Like, that's such egotism. It's,
Mhm.
Lord, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? How do you, and maybe the Lord's saying, I want you to clean the toilets at the church.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, every time I clean the toilet, I'm going to think of St. John Damascene. He was an incredible hymnographer. He was an incredible saint. But when he went to his monastery, his abbot told him to wash the toilets. That was his role. It was to wash the toilets, until the Mother of God was like, I want this guy writing hymns for me. I don't want to wash the toilets. But until then, so every time we wash a toilet, we can think of St. John Damascene, and we can be like, I am imitating St. John Damascene, not just a toilet washer, a great saint of our church. There's so
Yeah.
many things that are within our means to identify with the good elements of all of these mundane tasks,
Mhm.
if we see them mundane. And then there's also greater things we're called to, but 100%, if we read the lives of the saints, you're going to, like St. Juliana that we just read about, a mother of 7 children, took care of her in-laws. What did
Mhm.
she do? She stricted more fastly. She slept less. She gave more things away. She did things for other people. All
And
of
she
those.
took care of her in-laws. I mean, even those things that we kind of gloss over, it's like,
Yes.
um, yeah, so I think we're bringing in a lot of world, not you and I, but I'm just saying we as Orthodox Christians tend to borrow from the world um, what they believe to be good or true or valuable, right? And so people value the priesthood, right? And it should be valued, but it doesn't matter. We're not trying to compete, right, with the men in the church. We're trying to, as you so eloquently said, we're trying to figure out, what does God want from me, right? And offer that in love. And so it doesn't matter if you're cleaning toilets or if you're translating books or if you're writing icons, no matter what you're doing, as long as you're doing it for God, that's what matters. That's what we
Exactly.
want, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I also want to touch on what you were saying about Saint Saint Seraphim of Sarov, and this whole idea that we have in Orthodoxy that evangelism has to start in us, right? We live a prayerful life and thousands around us will be saved, right? So does that have to come first before we do any kind of exterior
Yeah, I
evangelism?
think that if our own inner like spiritual life, if our daily spiritual life isn't the main priority, then our priorities are misaligned.
Mhm.
The absolute main priority of our life shouldn't be whether or not we eat healthy. It shouldn't be whether or not we work out. It shouldn't be whether or not we are volunteer. It should be, have I done my spiritual duties daily, every day?
Mhm.
Just like you don't go to sleep without brushing your teeth. And if you do, you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot to brush my teeth. That is actually the exact same way we should be with our prayer rules. We should be with reading scripture. We should be with being attentive to where our thoughts have been, to, the sins we have committed on a daily basis. Very few people will go days and days without eating. They make the time to eat even when they don't feel like they have the time. Okay. It's the same thing with our prayers. It's a necessity. It's not a when I have time thing. It's I absolutely everything. If I can't even say good morning to my family, then I can't say good morning to my family if it means I miss my prayers. Like, I'm not saying you don't say good morning. What I'm saying is the absolute priority is our prayers and our spiritual tasks according to what has been decided with our spiritual father. So it's not our own personal idea, because then we can either do too little or we can do too much or whatever the case may be. Maybe our spiritual father says right now, when you have young children, your prayer rule is to say the Our Father. Then we make sure that we say the Our Father.
Mhm.
Maybe a different context, our spiritual father tells us, actually, I want you to read the hours. I want you to do morning and evening prayer. I want you to do this many prostrations. I want you to do this many prayer reps. We do it. Like that's the priority. So that's the first thing. And if that's not our priority, then we can just zip it and put that in order first before we go seeking anything else. Because a lot of times we want something else that makes us feel more important or this or that. None of that matters. Absolutely what matters is to have the discipline, the personal discipline to daily do our prayers according to, again, the guidance of our spiritual father. And then I think it's really important for us to while we're maybe discerning what we feel called to, what kinds of things we can do to minister to Christ, we can always be asking ourselves what our intention is. Because, not only does the scripture say, don't let your left hand know what your right is doing, a lot of times we do things because, for example, the priesthood. People look at the priesthood and they think this person, has everyone waiting around to talk to him. This person has everyone telling him all their innermost secrets. He's given, deference. His hand is kissed. People invite him places. But the true life of a priest really is what the scriptures talk about, like serving tables. It's like the deacon. Like we need deacons to do this work. The life of the priest is to serve the people. And it can look like there's a lot of glory there, and there can be a lot of glory there, and beautiful vestments, and sometimes beautiful singing, and the way people treat their priests can be very, and hopefully it is, very respectful and everything. But the true life of a priest is a life of sacrifice. It's a crucified life. So it's worthy for us to want that, for us to want to sacrifice our life for Christ, not for the glory, but for the building up of the faithful. But so I think that we need to take a step back and always be remembering, especially in our times where it's so easy to set up a video camera and videotape yourself doing your prayers. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand it. I understand you want an inspiration for someone else, but if the scriptures tell us, don't let your left hand know what your right is doing, we want to be really mindful of that. Where is behind those things, and where our intention is when we are seeking certain roles and what we want to do. It's not always bad, it's not always bad to want to do the highest thing. But something my professor used to always say, he'd say, these women that want to be ordained a priest, and he would say, have you become a presbytera? Have you become a priest wife? Because there's that role too. I'll tell you, if you feel called, there might be, I'm just saying, there's lots of men out there who wish to be ordained but can't be ordained because they don't have a spouse yet. And so that's too that people should pray about and discern about and think about, because is it an easy life? No. Is it going to get the glory that the priest gets? Whatever glory that is that a priest gets. I don't know. I haven't met many priests that get a lot of glory, but
It's a
no.
mixed bag, right? I mean, you get the,
Yeah,
people do, treat you as important because you are, right? And that can, it's
definitely.
a,
Definitely. But then
yeah.
people don't necessarily know what your first name is.
Really?
Yes. They call you Matushka, they call you Persitera so much.
Oh,
This is why some people don't like those honorifics. They're like, call me by my name.
oh,
Like, like, yeah, no,
I didn't realize that actually.
it depends, right? And
Yeah.
so,
And the
people
priest is and his family are going to be attacked. People should understand that. They go through huge attack because if you can bring the priest down or someone in their family down, you'll scandalize so many people, right? So you're a
sure.
prime target. People should understand that.
Yeah. I mean, we're all right. All of us as Christians, when we're struggling, we're putting targets on
Mhm.
ourselves because the evil one's going to try to fight us and we try to live spiritual lives. But I just wanted to throw that out there too. Like there are so many young men, Father John teaches at a seminary, and there's young men that could be ordained or, would like to be ordained, but maybe they haven't met a spouse who's willing to take up that cross of, of being married to a man who is a priest. So the church comes first. Um, so I'll just throw that out there. It's also, there's also those things, right? Like there's so many different things that we can do to help. But if we could just ask Christ in our prayers, like, what is it that you want from me? Then that's the better way to approach things, instead of like us seeing this particular thing that we want to do. Like, I really like doing the flower arrangement. So that's the only thing I'm going to offer as my skill and my talent to the church. When it's like, that's really beautiful, but maybe what we actually need is someone who's willing to mop the floors, or in
Mhm.
addition, or, I'm just saying, like, there's so many different things. But the main thing, though, that we are all called to as women is to preach Christ. So what does that look like? What does it mean for me to preach Christ? Not just to do some good act for the parish or for my community, but like, what does it mean for me to preach Christ? And I think that's the most central thing that we should be asking ourselves. And if the answer is the best way I can do that is by becoming holy, then we know, okay, then I need to have my priorities aligned, that my spiritual life needs to be the central focus, keeping the fast, doing confession, those kinds of things. Again, of Bishop Agostinos, he says this wonderful thing. And since women were found worthy to be the first to hear the joyous message and were the first preachers of the resurrection, who would hinder women from carrying out missionary work? Women cannot become priests or bishops. They cannot wear vestments to celebrate divine liturgy or sacraments because Holy Scripture and sacred tradition exclude them. But aside from the holy altar and the pulpit of the church, an infinite level of missionary activity is open to those women who, with steadfast faith, burning love, and spotless purity, want to follow in the footsteps of the myrrh-bearing women. That's what they did. They preached Christ. St. Mary Magdalene was there at Pentecost. She received the gift to be able to understand multiple languages, and she went and she preached Christ. She went to Rome. She felt called to go to Emperor Tiberius and to tell him what Pilate had done and what the high priest Annas and Caiaphas had done. And there's a long thing about how she gives a full account to Caesar about what occurred. And it's really amazing. She had a lot of bravery to do that, but she trusted in God and she believed that that's what she was called to, and that's what she did. And many, many people converted because of the teachings of St. Mary Magdalene. If this is something we're called to, may it be blessed. This obviously in our times would take a lot of discernment. What does that look like? And with the blessing of our spiritual father, all things are possible. It's just to remember, like, that is ultimately what we're called to as women.
Mhm.
Whether we're mothers,
Yeah.
whether we don't have children, whether our children are grown, all of those things are secondary to the universal call to preach Christ.
Yes. So we all have that first step of men and women. You have to have a stable spiritual life according to the rules given to you by your spiritual father. And the second one is, if that first one is met, everyone has the the calling to preach Christ to everyone, right? As you
Yeah.
just said.
And again, it'll look differently, like it
Right.
doesn't mean that we all have a YouTube channel. It doesn't
Right.
mean that we all go out to the marketplace. It might be the quiet preaching that takes place with our prayer roll, standing in our prayer corner without the camera rolling. Like literally just us before Christ. And something that like occurred to me when I was reading about the lives of the Myrrhbearers is when St. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, when she went before Christ and she anointed his feet, it really made an impact on me when I thought about that in a contemporary context. So much of what we do, so many times you can see a video, right? And you're like, why is the video rolling? I don't understand. Like someone's weeping their grief or something. And you're like, but you had to set up the camera though, in order to do this. So like, there's a bit of that weird thing, right? So again, not always that people have these kind of intentions to show off, but there's that possibility that's there, that temptation's there. But when St. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, anointed Christ's feet, when the sinful woman anointed Christ's feet, it was to the total exclusion of what everyone else around them thought. When they did that, they were around a lot of Pharisees, a lot of people who did not believe that was appropriate. They were not doing it for the sake of
They were not glorified in the moment for that.
At all. Not by Judas, not by the Pharisees, no, none of them. Okay, not for the sake of the crowd. When St. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, went to Christ and she anointed his feet, her whole focus was, I will do this deed for my Lord and my God, that I am recognizing this person not as just a man, not only as man, but as the God man. And so it was 100% for God. It wasn't for the crowd. There was no vainglory involved in it. Those are the kinds of things we want to do. Every act that we do, we want it 100% to be for God. Obviously, things can get mixed in. Okay, we're not going to not do a good deed just because we know that there might be a temptation for us to feel vain about it or to have vainglory. But we need to be mindful of that. We want everything we do, whatever it is, for it to be 100% for the glory of God. That it's like we have tunnel vision. I don't even see anyone else who's around me. I do it for the sake of Christ. Or I do it for the sake of my brother or my sister who's suffering, again, in the name of Christ, because Christ says, for what you've done to the least of my brethren, that you've done to me. Everything, all of our good deeds should be done for Christ, whether it's done through a person or just purely, for Christ, like purely in our icon corner type of thing. And this is what the Myrrhbearers women were like. They were blind to who was around them. It didn't matter to them that they could have been arrested. It didn't matter to them that they could have died a similar death. None of it mattered. It mattered for them to be near Christ. St. Jerome talks about this actually when he interprets the gospel. I think it's for when he interprets the Gospel of Luke, but he says the women could not endure to be absent from the Lord's tomb even for a short while. So when Christ says rejoice, when he says hail to the women, that he says that the women hastened to the apostles so that through them, the women, the seedbed of the faith would be scattered. They didn't go to the apostles being like, hey, look at us. We saw Christ first. The apostles didn't even believe them. They were like, you just had a lack of sleep. A lot of crying has caused you to think things that haven't. They literally didn't believe them.
Yeah, that was standard.
Because St. Mary Magdalene went to them specifically and said, the Lord said, because when the angel said, go and tell the disciples and Peter, he said it because Peter had denied Christ. So he wanted to call him back. And then Peter and John come and they see for themselves that the tomb is empty. And so, but that idea, like through the women, the seedbed of the faith was scattered. Like that's amazing. And that's what we want, not because of the glory. Because I mean, the Myrrhbearers still, yes, we have a Sunday dedicated to them. Yes, we love them, but like they pale in comparison to the glory that the apostles have gotten. And maybe rightly so. But the thing is, especially with women's saints, women's saints don't always get as much glory as men's saints. It doesn't mean that in the kingdom of heaven they won't.
You're talking about on earth. They don't, not in heaven. Yeah.
Recognizing, women as much as some of the male saints. It's the same thing with saints that no one ever knew that they were saints. they're still going to have huge glory in the kingdom. And that's what we're seeking for. We're seeking not for the glory of this world, for other people to recognize our deeds, for other people to validate our ministry in the broad sense of, spreading the gospel. We're looking only to do that which Christ has called us to do, and to do it with our whole heart, the way the Myrrhbearers went with their whole heart to anoint Christ with spices, with myrrh.
Yeah. I mean, we keep coming back to that. It's kind of veiled in what you're saying, but it's there. Like, they loved Christ so much that everything they were doing was just an outpouring of that love. They couldn't stand to be away from the tomb, right? They're there as soon as they can be. It's very early on Sunday morning that they go, right? As soon as they can go, they do. And I also, with what you just said, it reminded me of how, sometimes it said that women and that Eve in the garden tried to supplant Adam and his, right? Adam was supposed to lead, and then she ends up leading, right? And this is the fall. And so you kind of see with these Myrrhbearers that they are staying in their lane. They're not trying to, as you just said, see, he appeared to us and not you guys, right? They still have that humility, and it's like a healing of that ancient, and that tendency that women can still have to supplant the place of the man, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why orthodoxy is always the answer. Christ is always the answer. In the church, we see the beautiful companionship between man and woman, but we also see that there is a hierarchy, and that both can coexist, in our faith and in our lives.
Yeah. And and for us to be, as women, for us to be satisfied, but not just satisfied, for us to actually be happy with what we're called to, with what is our role, for us to, yes, satisfied. Yes, I do mean satisfied, but I mean more than satisfied. I mean satisfied in the fullest sense of the word, in that not just settled with it, but like actually satisfied.
Embracing.
Like I am satisfied by the fact that, my husband is the one who is the head of the household. And it is very easy for me to try to usurp that. It happens to be my personal character, but I do think it is it's not just me, but that it's like there's a beautiful order in everything that God has established. And that beautiful order, that we would recognize it and take pleasure in, like spiritual pleasure in that order that God has established. There's so many things for us as women. We just have to look, and maybe we don't have to look. Maybe it's very evident to us. I don't know. But if it isn't evident to us, it can become very evident by reading the lives of the saints. And some are called to different things, like Saint Mary Magdalene, for her to go before Caesar and to say the things that she said with that bravery that she had. Like, I don't know that I could do that. For Saint Galactica to be an ascetic mother in the early church, basically to found women's monasticism. I don't know that could be me, but there's things that I can read in the lives of the saints that I can say, okay, well, I can try to apply that to my own life and my own circumstances, in within whatever confines I have. But just to remember, like when Saint Zosima went and met Saint Mary of Egypt, one of the things that he says in the life is grace is recognized not by one's orders, but by the gifts of the Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is for everyone, and the gifts of the Spirit are for everyone, and they'll manifest differently in women than they will in men. But they're there for us as much as they're there for men. And that's the amazing thing about Orthodoxy is, I've been Orthodox for a long time, and I never really bother much to look into other forms of denominations or whatever. But I would say, I would feel confident in saying that I would believe that there's no Christian denomination out there, any group that claims to be Christian, that honors and loves and upholds women as much as Orthodox Christianity does.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And there are some groups, I hope I don't scandalize anyone, but there are some groups that go so far on one side as to say that women are like second-class citizens, and that husbands should discipline their wives like they discipline the children. There's actual stuff on YouTube about this. Like, you can get into some crazy stuff, and that's why the church is always so beautiful, because it again, it upholds the value of women. There's nothing keeping us from high levels of spirituality, just like the men, right?
Yeah, and for the record, I sometimes joke about this, but the scriptures say that a husband's to love his wife.
Mm-hmm.
The wife is to obey the husband, but the harder thing is to actually love. They're called to, women should also love her husband. What I'm saying is,
Well,
for
of
you to
course.
love someone, it's different than, oh, I'm the boss and I will command you. Like, for you to
Right.
love someone, for you to act in such a way that it is always for the love of the person.
That's right.
Good luck with that. It's not easy.
Yeah, that's what I mean by it's a hot mess in the world.
That responsibility, like, that's a man's responsibility. Like, good luck going to the judgment, because when you go to the judgment, you're going to have to justify every single thing, what you did, what you said. Was it for the love of your wife? And if it wasn't for the love of your wife, what was it? It fell short. It fell short. So that's the harder thing. The love is harder than just to obey. So, we need to be mindful of that. When we're called to something with a higher responsibility, we have to give an account for that. So, but I mean, that aside, people can think whatever they like. I don't know. That seems strange to me, but go to your spiritual father, have a conversation, whatever.
It wasn't Orthodox people I saw doing this. I'm just pointing out that in our society, we have kind of extreme feminism, and then we have extremes on the other side. And this is why you come to the church for answers, and you're not going to find the answer in the world.
But no, like, women are in the Orthodox Church are amazing. Like, half of my icon corner now is women. So the women's saints are on this side. And it's like, sometimes I just think, like, all these amazing things, like the Myrrhbearers are here. Saint Thecla, the first martyr, is here. She was betrothed. She heard St. Paul preach, and she just left everything to follow St. Paul. And she has an incredible story about St. Paul really put her to the test. And for example, she followed him once, and he went to a city, and they tried to kind of abuse her. And she said, look, I'm with this man. He's my teacher. And St. Paul's like, I don't know who she is. And he did it on purpose. He did it on purpose to test her. And then later, when they again join up, because she again follows him, she's like, he says to her, listen, I need to explain, my child, why I did that. And she's like, I understood, because she knew too that St. Paul wanted her to seek after Christ more than she sought after Paul. This is something in the Orthodox Church where we have a tendency to love our spiritual father, a lot, but to the exclusion of perhaps the love we have for our spouse, for our husband, or for the love that we have for Christ. So this whole story of St. Thecla's life is incredible. At one point, she's in the amphitheater, she's going to be tortured, and she's seeing St. Paul in the crowd, but suddenly St. Paul is Christ's face. And again, that confirms that spiritual father relationship, that it's actually just through this person that I am tied to Christ. Like, that's the ultimate, that's the goal.
Right.
So beautiful stories, St. Mary Magdalene's up there, St. Cassiani, hymnographer. Again, these things were allowed for women. She's a hymnographer of the church. Her hymns are sung in the Orthodox Church. It's not like, oh, because it's written by a woman, we're not going to sing it in the church. St. Catherine, the great martyr, who with her speech converted 200 philosophers, refuted them, and was able to speak with wisdom and preach Christ. St. Elizabeth, the new martyr, who did many great deeds. She was a convert from Lutheranism and became a nun and helped loads and loads of people. And there's others there. St. Lydia, who had the first church in Europe, was in her home in Greece. So the point being, open any Lives of the Saints, look at any icons, and you'll find a plethora of it's a treasure trove of things that we can apply to our own lives. Forget the priesthood. It doesn't matter that we can't be priests. Who cares about that? It's literally the same as a man bemoaning the fact that he can't become an angel or an archangel. Who cares?
A mother.
Or a mother. Or a mother. But it's a beautiful thing that they are precluded from. Okay, they're precluded. It just is the fact we accept our tradition. We accept the scriptures.
Yeah, I want to go back to that acceptance because, sorry, go ahead.
No, just that, let's look at what's available to us.
Yeah. And that might change at different parts in your life. I remember when my children were very young and we were in the early years of homeschooling, I had to come to the point where I realized I need to give my all to this job. This is the job that God has called me to. And, I had some thoughts about maybe doing some theological training, and I just thought, no, I can't do that. I can't do that and take care of, 4 kids and homeschool and do all this. So I had to kind of close the door on that in my own heart, right? I hadn't taken any
Yeah.
steps, but it was a little bit hard. But I just remember thinking that, in our church, God can enlighten you. And if I'm doing this for him, because I feel like this is what he's giving me, and I'm going to fully embrace it. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to wish I'm over there doing something else. I'm going to be here in this moment with these children and give myself to it. And I feel like that was like so good for me. And now 20 years later, as the last one's preparing to leave, it's like, thank God. Thank God I embraced that. Right.
Exactly.
And now
Because it
God is
makes
giving me
sense.
something different to do.
Exactly. That's
So
why we
it's going to change maybe in your life.
yeah, and just for us to be satisfied with that and be okay
Mhm.
with that, and to look for whatever within that we can do to feel like we're living for Christ. Like all every day to just ask ourselves like, how can I live for Christ in this circumstance, in this place, as a social worker, as whatever.
Mhm.
And to to keep in mind like that, I think it's Elder Athanasius. He says, the the place is sanctified by the man, not the man by the place.
Mm.
Like it's not circumstances. Like forget about that. Oh, if only I lived with a community of people. And no. It's like now in this circumstance, whatever it is, this is today, this situation, I'm called to become holy. And how am I going to do that? And what am I going to do today to avoid sin and to, quell my passions? That's all that we're asked. That's what's asked of us. That's it, no matter what our circumstances are. And it's really easy to look and say, oh, if only this or if only that. If I could be
Mhm.
a priest, I could help so many more people. Or and the truth is like there's lots of people who can't be priests either that are men. So I
Mhm.
mean, let's move on from what isn't available to us and let's look at what is available to us. And then like do it with our whole heart, the way the women ran to the tomb. They waited all of the Sabbath to be able to go back, and they knew
Mhm.
like they brought spices, they brought myrrh to anoint Christ. They didn't know how they were going to move the rock. They saw it. They knew it was going to be impossible for them to do it. And yet
Yeah.
still they went.
You could
Still
say
they
they were irrational even to a certain degree, right? How are they gonna get
yeah,
in?
of course.
But it was love that drove them, right? It was that wanting to be with the Lord, and they were
Yeah. And so, and they talked, I mean, the angel could appear to them outside of the tomb, but the angel rolled back the stone
Mhm.
specifically because they had seen Christ lay in the tomb, the fathers say. So they saw the actual tomb empty.
Yeah.
And then they go and proclaim to the apostles that Christ is risen. And that's what we're called to do. We're called, like, what does that look like for us, though? How do we tell people Christ is risen? Maybe it doesn't mean that we literally say Christ is risen, but how do we show people that in our own life, in our conduct, in our words, in our manner, in the way we dress, in the way that we conduct ourselves at all times? Like at all times, Christ is expecting us to preach Him. It mightn't be with words, but we need to be cognizant of that because at all times
Mhm.
Christ is asking this of us.
And do you think it's important for women to have some level of theological understanding or understanding about the church in general?
What, to preach Christ?
Yeah.
Well, again, I don't know. I think that the preaching Christ is what's up for debate. I don't think you need to preach Christ with words. Like I literally think that
Wait, say
sometimes
that again? Sorry.
not to
Mm.
preach Christ with words, but to preach Christ with your lifestyle, with your
Mm.
own manner, with your own conduct, so that someone else might not know that you're a Christian and you might not ever speak about your faith openly. But so I'll give you an example. Okay. But before I give the example, I'm just saying that just by our mode of life that we would preach Christ, by the way that we meekly accept, certain circumstances,
Absolutely.
by the way that we act humbly, by the way that we are quick to ask for forgiveness, that is actually what preaches Christ. My words and the things that I say that come from my own logic don't usually help people. So whether we have a theological background or not, like I have a master's degree in theology from the Aristotle University in Thessaloniki. I mean, Thessaloniki, the Thessalonians where St. Paul wrote to. I personally do not think that I'm in a position to preach open, like to like debate someone, for example. Okay. It's not something I would do well. If someone asked me, I'd gladly tell people things about my faith, but it's not something that I am not personally called to that. And so I would encourage others, if you feel like preaching Christ, you can. I would just caution to be careful with the things you say, because we can mislead accidentally. But if someone asks us, we shouldn't be afraid to answer. If someone
that's more of what I'm talking about.
And I don't think you need a theological education for that at all, because theology is born in the heart of a purified person. That's true theology. Book knowledge is something different, completely different.
Yeah, let me back up, because I don't think we're saying opposite things or different things. I agree with you. I guess I was putting the way we preach Christ and the way that we live more in the Saint Seraphim level of what he's talking about. Like that's just obvious that should be happening, right? And when I say theological education, I don't mean a formal education, but always learning about the church, always trying to know more and more and have an understanding.
Yes, like that. Absolutely.
We all need that. That's not only for men. And I remember one particular situation, just as an example that I had, where we had a situation where a lady I knew, her son came out as being transgender. He wanted to live as a girl. This is Orthodox people. And so she began to tell me, as she was explaining this to me, that, well, there were even saints who were women saints who lived as men, and they would go to a men's monastery. Now, and I think back on that, and I think if I had not read those lives and known exactly what she was talking about, I wouldn't have had an answer for that. But because I had read them, more than one, because there's several women that do that, I could say, actually, no, when they received communion, they would leave their hat kind of on a little bit, because they identify, I mean, it's crazy to say this, but they were identifying as women. So they were trying to cover their head a little bit when they received communion. It specifically said that in the life. And so I guess I'm talking more about being ready to answer the culture or to answer people's questions when they're coming, like to not be ignorant as best as we can to know.
Yeah, I think as best as we can be. Like, maybe we don't feel that is something we could ever do, though. And that's okay. Like, it's okay.
It is okay.
If you don't know the life of the saint, that it was very specific context that they were doing it. It was before there was women's monasteries. It was like women couldn't congregate together outside of a city. It was dangerous.
Or they were hiding from someone that was looking for them. Yeah, I mean, they were.
I think Matrona. So there's different contexts, but whether or not a person knows the answers, A, God can enlighten them, but B, prayer is always the best answer. So if we're not able to actually to articulate to someone a rebuttal, we can just say, well, that's not what I believe. Or you can say, that's not what I was taught even. That would suffice, because you're still confessing the faith, but maybe you're confessing the faith with as much knowledge as you have, or with as much skill as you have to say, well, no, that's not really what the church teaches. And maybe you could ask someone else, but it depends on the context, but we have so many resources. So we shouldn't shy away from becoming as wise as possible about our faith, from reading the hymnology, like going to services, hearing the hymnology, reading the lives of the saints, reading the scriptures, becoming familiar with all of those things. We don't really have an excuse not to occupy our time with that, because we have so many means now to do that. It's different when you were illiterate and or before the printing press, and you just didn't have those, So I'm not saying we're guilty before God if someone says to us something about, transgenderism, and we're not able to give an articulate, answer. But in as much as we have the time and the capacity, it is a good work for us to pursue the knowledge of the church and the knowledge of the lives of the saints, of the writings of the fathers and the mothers, of all of these things. And a lot of our theology comes from hymnology. So just being in the church and listening to the hymns is really, really valuable if we can't read them, and even being in a church where it's not our language and listening to the hymns, still God can enlighten you, we learned modern Greek primarily because we went to church. So the priest that we had, he was a professor of patristics. His homilies were very helpful for us to learn Greek, but the services were in ancient Greek. We weren't going to learn that easily, but somehow, because we surrounded ourselves with theological language, even the ancient Greek of the services, you start to pick up on some of the things. So again, even if you're in a church that doesn't speak English or whatever your native language is, maybe you don't understand the services, still God's grace can enlighten us to know what's being said and all of that. Yeah.
And never putting study, above your spiritual life. Just want to reiterate that. Obviously, your spiritual life has to always be the foundation of anything else you do, as you pointed out. So
yeah. But what story I was thinking of when I said, like, by us preaching Christ is in the life of St. Mary Magdalene. It says that when Pilate was called in to see Caesar, when he was on trial for the unjust death of an innocent, righteous man, the God man, when he was let in, so it was a custom that if the person who was being tried made eye contact with Caesar, he could kind of be spared a death sentence. So sometimes they would bring them in blindfolded. So when Annas came to the high priest, he was blindfolded so that he couldn't meet Caesar's eyes. But Caesar had said, you can bring Pilate in even without a blindfold. I'm not pardoning him. So Pilate gets brought in and Caesar sees him. And suddenly Caesar is like moved seeing Pilate. He's completely moved. He stands up, he salutes Pilate, and he kind of like wavers and is like taken aback and thinks, I need to go easy on him. And he sits down, and the former whatever Pontius Pilate was, like the former proconsul who had Pontius Pilate's position, he's there with Caesar, and he kind of notices this. And so does St. Mary Magdalene, who has been called as a witness to say, look, I was there. I was present when Caesar said, I find no fault in this man, but I'll put it in anyway. So she's there and she understands what's going on. And she says to the proconsul, can I please speak with Caesar? And Caesar was so sort of taken aback that the proconsul, without even asking his permission, tells her, yes, like, go ahead and speak to him directly. And so she says, Caesar, I understand what's happening. You're taken aback because the clothing that Pilate is wearing belongs to my teacher. So Pilate had seen, when they talk in the scripture that Christ had the seamless garment that the mother had made for him.
Right.
So it looks just like what the priests wear now, Phalonian. It's seamless. Like, really, if you look close, you can see seams on a Phalonian. But the idea would be that it's like this one piece of material with just space for the neck to go through. So she recognizes it and she says, what's actually happening is basically because of the grace that was contained within the garment that Christ wore, that they had placed bets who would get it. They didn't want to because it was such a beautiful garment. Pilate had seen this garment afterwards and he bought it off of one of the soldiers who had won it. And so he put it on himself sort of as like a little talisman. I'm going to be a little protected now when I go to see Caesar for killing this unjust man. He puts the garment on. So St. Mary Magdalene recognizes that the grace that was contained just in the garment, that's actually what was impacting Caesar. That was what took him aback and made him want to be merciful to Pilate. So when she said, this is my teacher's garment, he says, take it off of him. The guards take off the garment from Pilate and they bring it up to Caesar. And Caesar looks at it and he even shows St. Mary Magdalene and she sees the red linen thread that it was sewn with. And she said, yes, this is my teacher's garment. The Virgin Mariam, who they keep referring to Jesus, this son of Mariam. They referred to him during the trial. She said, she has made this. And this is the grace of this garment is what's, so that's what I meant by even without verbally preaching, if we have acquired within us the grace of God, which we have anyway from our baptism, but in addition to that, from our own personal ascesis and the good works that we've done in our prayers, then that alone will be seen by other people and people will be impacted by it. So whether they know we're a Christian or not, they will be impacted by that holiness that's communicated. That's what I meant by preaching the gospel even without words. That's the predominantly what we're, if even Pilate could go before Caesar during a trial for him having not followed the Constitution and put a just man to death unjustly,
Mm-hmm.
Caesar be like, oh, I should be merciful to this person. I see something here. He was seeing the grace that was contained within the garment. And that's, what the holy relics of the saints are, that the Holy Spirit has indwelt in them. And so their body itself has become sanctified. So their bones themselves are fragrant. The bones themselves work miracles.
Yeah, and St. Mary Magdalene's hand herself stays
Yeah.
warm, correct? It's incorrupt
I
and
know it's warm. I'm not sure. I know that I think a piece of it might be incorrupt. I'm not really sure.
yeah, it's her left hand, and I think it's in Simonis Petra. And I always thought it only got warm on her feast day, but I recently read, this week that it was always warm. So I'm not sure which one, but yeah, that incorrupt hand from Saint Mary Magdalene. Um, yeah, I do want to just make sure I'm not being misunderstood, not by you, but anyone out there, like what you're explaining, that, the life lived in Christ, and that is what's drawing people to Christ 100%. Absolutely. I think the reason why I'm pushing on the point of this education of women is because in the world there are an increasing amount of Orthodox people who are following worldly ideas that women should not be educated. That's kind of why I'm
Right,
harping on this a
right.
little bit,
Yeah.
not because we should put an earthly or a study of the faith above living or prayer or
Yeah.
anything like that. So I just want to be really clear with people about
Right.
that we're in agreement that the spiritual life is the primary way
Yeah.
that we draw people, because if you know a bunch of things but you have no faith, a living faith, right? It's
Yeah.
nothing. It's not. It'll make people run from Christ, not towards Christ.
100%. We can communicate a lot with our words and with our interior state. And when we
Right.
have a poor disposition and when we have egotism, we can say the best words and it will have the worst effect
Yeah.
because of the disposition of our heart. Saint Theophan the recluse speaks about this. To correct someone, there's no easier thing, but to correct them so that they don't get negatively impacted is the hardest thing, because you need to be without passion in order to do that, in order to correct someone and them not be provoked. So the best means is for us to live a life of holiness, quietly, personally, striving internally, and then try to spread the gospel in whatever context Christ calls us to. But I learned myself, like, this whole entire book that I wrote came from my own desire to come to this place that had no orthodoxy and to establish orthodoxy, and for tons of people to become Orthodox, and for, I had all these dreams and expectations because I had my will all tied up in it. And it took a lot of various things to go through for that to be crushed, and for me to finally truly and authentically say, like, not my will but God's will, and to say, I will just reap and God will sow. It's his to sow, it's not mine to reap. But I've been looking all this time to reap,
Right.
or I will sow and he will reap, I guess is what I mean. So, like, literally, like, I know this from my own experience, literally wrote an entire book because I had to get over myself. I had to get over that, what the life that I pictured it would be. It wasn't that life. And it was more of a life of clean toilets. Just kidding.
Well, we're not saints yet.
For those women out there thinking about being a priest's wife, we'll just be a little bit clean.
I'd love for you to talk about that if you want to in a minute, the being a priest wife. I think that's or we can do a whole show on that. But
Yeah, that would be a whole show.
So, we're not saints yet. And of course the saints did have the Myrrhbearers, they had that perfect love for God, and as you said, that kind of oneness of vision, right? They're just blocking everything else up and going for Christ. We don't have that yet, right? And so sometimes our intentions, like, we really do want to help spread the faith, right? I know with this channel, like, my own, ego or pride or whatever, it gets mixed in. I'm not a saint yet, right? So as you just kind of describe that process of working through it, spiritually with confession and things,
Yeah.
I don't think we should not help other people, even though we can recognize that my intentions aren't pure.
Yeah.
I still have pride. We still have to realize that, right?
Yeah.
So let's say somebody um, does have some thoughts on, here's what I would like to do, right? The big thing now is everyone's making, online content, right? That seems to be the biggest thing that people have thoughts about doing, right? And there is a need, I think, in certain spheres, right? Not everyone's going to be a debater, obviously, but so if someone has this idea, what should they do if they want to make sure that they're following what Christ wants them to do? Like, what is the steps that they need to? Should they just jump in, or should they,
Specifically to like online stuff, or just in general, if they
in
feel.
general? But if you want to speak it about online stuff, you can.
I mean, I'm not personally a huge online person. We've done this series,
Hmm.
and I have posted some things on my YouTube channel from years, but homilies of Father John or talks that
Hmm.
I give, and I used to give more public engagement. Sort of did some public speaking more retreats and stuff. So I don't feel like I'm the right person to speak to because it's not something I personally like. I did have a blog for years. For years, I had a blog and I really enjoyed that. That's very different medium than the videos
Yeah,
and stuff. Like
it is.
definitely still can be different things mixed into it. Um, so I would just say to people, just as a general rule, like if you feel like you should do something, you feel like this is what's, God's calling you to do. I would just recommend a couple of things. I would recommend like really personally praying about it and not just like once in a while, but like saying, okay, I'm going to take 40 days and I'm going to specifically do this, akathis every day or paraklesis every day or a certain amount of Jesus prayers every day in order to discern, is this God's will or is it my will? Because if it's
Hmm.
just our will, then there's no point in doing it. We might as well put it aside, no matter how good it is. If it's only our will, it's not.
It'll be harmful. It'll be harmful to us and others.
We want to do what God's will is. So,
Yeah.
so something like that, I would say, seek out your spiritual father, have a conversation, a frank conversation about what the intention
Mhm.
is, what the goal is, what kind of, how much time are we going to spend on this? All of that stuff should really be thought of ahead of jumping in, because sometimes things take a lot more time than we realize and we don't have the
Mhm.
capacity to do it. And then we can start something and not be able to finish it and get discouraged. And it can just be like this. Instead of it being something good for us, it becomes this big upset because we had this big intention, we weren't able to do it, and we get really disappointed. So talk to our spiritual father. And if we're married women, my personal opinion is ask the advice and the opinion of your husband.
Mhm.
My
Absolutely.
husband happens to always have good opinions, even if I don't always agree. No, but I trust him. Like
Yeah.
he's very discerning, he's very wise, all of those things. But even if he wasn't, the blessings that come from us showing Christ our disposition to trust our husband and to defer to him and have
Mhm.
his advice and to have, it's really good. But it's also like that's our way, right? That's our tradition. It's like we should have like the way that if things worked properly, we would have the blessing of our husband. We would have the blessing of our
Mhm.
parents. We would, if we were young and we're living at home, we're not
Mhm.
living with a spouse, we should have the blessing of our parents. Now, whether our parents are in a position to make the best decisions about what's best for us spiritually, or whether even our husband is in a position to decide what's best for us spiritually, that's up, depends on the context.
Mhm.
A perfect situation, in a situation where we do have God-fearing parents, where we do have a God-fearing husband, we should defer to them. We should ask their counsel and we should listen to them. Like that is our tradition. That is our
Mhm.
scriptures. So that's what I would recommend. Like pray about it, if possible, fast about it, talk to, our husband or our parents, and definitely talk to our spiritual father or our bishop,
Mhm.
forget that too. But like, at the end of the day, like if we're going to speak out, we really should have our bishop's blessing, because the way that things work is like the priest couldn't just preach, do whatever he wanted. No, like
Mhm.
tied to the bishop, and the bishop decides if the priest is a preacher, if the priest is a spiritual father. Like, and because of necessity, priests confess, right? They do confession with people. But again, in some places, the priest wouldn't just have a carte blanche or whatever they call it, white,
Mhm.
weeping, you can confess whoever you want. No, it would be specific priests, usually older, that would be
Mhm.
deemed as spiritual fathers. So that's the only thing I would suggest, like in terms of that, is like really think and pray about it, and always, like, we should always approach everything with a lot of prayer, not a little bit of prayer, not one
Mhm.
prayer,
Yeah.
not like, oh, I got this idea, I'm super enthusiastic, I'm going to quickly go, Kitty Zucker say this, I'm Lord Jesus Christ have mercy. I mean, I'm going to fly through the prayer rope and I'm going to feel good that I prayed. But no, like, really dedicate time to pray and to discern and to think about
Mhm.
it. In everything that we do, we shouldn't rush into anything. Or that obviously we're close to the throne. Greece used to always say that to us. In the spiritual life, if we rush, we trip, which I mean is the same in anything, right? You
Yeah.
rush, you fall, you make mistakes. So we don't want to rush into anything. We want to do everything with a lot of prayer and a lot of discernment.
Yeah. And it'll become obvious, I think, if you take those steps, if this is something that God is really calling you to, or it's some kind of temptation. Like what I said when I was younger, and I did have that thought of maybe I should be doing this thing over here. It's a
Yeah,
temptation, because it would have drawn me out of what God was actually calling me to. So
yeah,
just because God is closing one door, there's a door open for you. You just have to figure out
yeah,
which door it is,
yeah.
with the help of your spiritual father and husband, if you have one.
Yeah. And I think it would be like a really fun idea to do a whole like series on being like a clergy wife, being a
Mhm.
priest wife, being a deacon's wife. But for anyone out there who's even slightly thinking about it, like pray about it. Like maybe God will put someone in your life for you to marry so that you can support them in being a priest. Like we need that. We
We
need
really need that.
to be willing to be priest wives. It's not easy, but it is also very blessed. And so like pray about that. Like I'm not saying just show up unannounced at a seminary and like I'm eligible to be married. But like think about it and pray about it, because there really is a need for, and who's going to stand up and say this? Like a seminarian is going to be like, hey ladies, we need women. Like, no, so
Yeah.
I as a priest wife can say, like, really, like, think and pray about that, because that's also necessary.
We used to, take this little old Russian lady to church. She didn't have a husband or children or anything, and so she must have been, like, 80s, and she had quite a little sassy personality, and so we would take her up for church, and she'd tell us all these stories, usually the same story over and over, but, she had one where she was from New York, that whole area, and I think her church that she grew up in was close to either St. Vlad, I think it was St. Vlad's, and, and so she said, well, every once in a while, she kinda got seminary and monastery mixed up, so she'd say the monasterians would come down and come to our church for events because they all wanted to get married. And "What are you talking about?" "Oh, seminarians." She means seminarians. But they would come to the churches kind of with their
Yeah,
feelers out, looking for a
yeah,
wife. It's important though, you know? They've
it
done
is.
the work and now they're just kind of in a holding pattern. It's very difficult, I'm sure.
Yeah. And maybe not just seminaries, just in general. Maybe
Mhm.
you're dating someone who's thinking about the life of the priesthood, or maybe, I don't know. It's worth praying about that. Maybe God is asking you to take on that role. And I mean, and even that role looks very differently for different people. Like sometimes it just means you're raising your kids and you're a support for your husband. And that's as far as that role sort of goes, because you don't
Mhm.
have the capacity to be more than that. You don't have the capacity to be the Sunday school teacher or whatever. But
Mhm.
sometimes you can do all kinds of things. So it's just something I'll throw out, because it is a role that is unique to women. Like
Mhm.
that is the role to be a priest wife. It's unique to women, and our church honors that. And that's why the priest wife goes by, Matushka or Prasatera or various, all the different languages have these honorifics, mother.
Mhm.
So, and it's an honorific because, you are married to a priest, and that's like a really beautiful and sacred part of the marriage. The man is a priest. He doesn't put that off. There's no putting it off. He is a priest at all times. You can't take it off.
Mhm.
So anyway, I think, yeah, that would be worthwhile to maybe chat about, but it just, in terms of like the Myrrhbearing women, like just to think like, how can I be like a Saint Mary of Magdalene? How can I be like a Saint Susanna, Saint Joanna? What is it that I have to do to show Christ that with my whole heart I seek after him? And that's why, Saint Porphyrius, he really loved that hymn, which I think is that Politician for Martyrs. It's like, I have run to the fragrance of thy myrrh. Do not part from you, O heavenly bridegroom. Like I've run to the
Mhm.
fragrance of your myrrh. And they talk about this in the lives of the Myrrhbearers. They brought myrrh with, and they brought spices. The Latin is incense. That's the word in Latin
Hmm.
anyway. Um, and yet and the fathers will say, and yet you went to the myrrh, capital M, the myrrh, like Christ is the myrrh. Like his body was never going to be corrupt. His body was never going to smell. He was never going to decompose. He is the life giver. He is the fragrance giver. He's the source of beautiful smells and of incorruption. And so, you know, anyway, that's St. Porphyrius thought of that in that hymn, and it really drew to him, you know. I've run to the fragrance of your love. That's what we have to do. We have to look, how can I run to the fragrance of Christ's love? Like what is it he calling me to do that I can run there with my whole heart and to stay there and to never leave?
Wow. Well, that's a beautiful place to end. I was going to ask you about any other female saints, but that's such a lovely, beautiful sentiment, something we can hold on to, unless you want to share another life. But that's just what could be better, And that's why they were able to just put their blinders on and just follow Christ, because it was all that love and just, like you said, running to him. It's beautiful. Okay, Matushka. Well, any last thoughts?
No, I think that's about it, best friend. I think there's so many the hymns that talk a lot about them. The one other line I guess I'll just say is, "Come, let us duly crown with hymns the women great in love for God." So hopefully, Christina, you and I have done a little bit, a tiny touch of honor to these holy women, and that we'll have their prayers and their intercession and their grace will visit us to help encourage us to discover where it is that Christ calls us, and that we will have the courage and the boldness like them to go in that direction no matter what it is.
No matter. And don't listen to the world that, scrubbing toilets is low and, these other things are high. Doesn't matter.
Isn't
Doesn't
just
matter.
toilets. There's loads and loads and loads
You
that work.
can,
It's just
yeah, doing it for God.
Nothing is above us and nothing is below us. If anything is done for
Mhm.
Christ, then it has worth.
That's right. Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Matushka. Can we say something about your book? Your book has come out. I've started it. It's delightful.
I don't know if the link is up yet. I must check. We do things old school up here in Canada, so you can call the phone number, you can send a facsimile, and you can get yourself a copy. You can also email. We're not that old school.
Well, I did email through the website, and then I got a phone call back, and they took it, old school. So it was really quaint and beautiful. I was totally fine with it. But so we're serious. If you want the book, you probably do have to.
Yeah, for real.
Actually call them.
I mean,
It's
we
not
will.
listed in the
I
website.
assume eventually the catalog and stuff it'll be updated online. And I know the Alexander Press, their books are sold at St. Vladimir's Press. So I don't know if they have I don't think that they have this book yet, but you could always contact St. Vladimir's Press and any other distributor in the United States or abroad, I guess, that distributes Alexander Press books, because presumably they would be able to get that. So, and I was just so busy with with Great Lent and Holy Week, and I haven't gotten to, but hopefully St. Vladimir's Press will be sent a copy, and then they sell my other books as well from Ancient Faith. So hopefully they'll be, different, not just St. Vladimir's, anywhere can sell the books, Holy Trinity Monastery in New York or wherever distributes them.
Maybe in the little tiny out of African lands. You want to tell us again?
The Life of St. Perpetua, as told by St. Perpetua, but as retold a little bit by me. So yeah, lots of saints we could talk about. We could do a whole series of lives of saints, of women saints, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, this is a little unscripted, but we'll go for it. Did you have a topic for next time you want to talk about?
Maybe we could talk about being a priest wife.
I was hoping in July we would talk about St. Paisios, so I'm staking a claim to that one. But you can pick between.
Like from here on out, we'll just do the lives of the saints for the next however long and choose something we want to chat about, or we could do all kinds of things.
Okay, so if people have suggestions, they can let us know.
Yeah.
But okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you again, Matushka. It was great seeing you. I feel like we laughed more during Lent and a little more serious after Lent. Just kind of funny, but we haven't seen each other for a while, and I think we all enjoyed it. But thank you. Christ is risen.
Truly, He is risen.
You want to end with a prayer? What are we doing?
Sure. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, our Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Amen. Take care, everyone. Thanks for being here.